Story 1. Not being able to hear a song when I wanted to. You had to go to the store and buy it or wait for it to play on the radio. Story 2. Riding your bicycle across town to see if your friend is home, and if they are, would their parents allow them to come outside? If they are not home, then you have to take a sad, boring ride all the way back home. Story 3. It is a lot easier to maintain relationships with friends from your past than it used to be. Even if it is just occasional updates on social media, I like seeing my old friends' lives. Story 4. You had to call the movie theater and listen to a recording to get the movies and times they showed. Story 5. Not being able to call someone out for being dishonest. You could claim many wild things without having a resource to verify what was being said. Story 6. Believe it or not, people were even more mistaken before the internet. Just think of all the incorrect things that older generations say, and imagine actually believing them. Story 7. Getting lost all the time. People always say everyone got around just fine before Google Maps. I absolutely did not. I have no sense of direction. Story 8. As a child without internet, I had to ask adults for answers. Especially as a smart child who read a lot, I knew enough to generally understand if they were wrong and tried to explain why, offering my ideas to brainstorm. I remember many annoyed faces and frustration. Story 9. Paying bills used to be a serious pain. God forbid you had to go to the bank to cash your paycheck. Now I can deposit directly from my phone. The future is very convenient. Story 10. If you did not know how to do something and could not find someone to guide you, you had no way of getting the task done correctly in a timely manner. Trial and error was your only teacher. Story 11. Waiting for the radio to play my favorite song so I could record it onto a cassette. Half the time, the disc jockey would talk over the best part. Story 12. Trying to navigate new places on vacation. Trying to find a bathroom after driving for 4 hours when everyone needs to pee. It is dark and nobody can read the map. The global positioning system saved our sanity 1,000,000 times over. Story 13. You had to call people on a landline phone. You either had to memorize a phone number or carry it with you on a piece of paper. If you lost someone's number, you possibly had no way to contact them. Story 14. Being awake at 2 a.m. with an obscure question in my head and not being able to search for an answer. Story 15. Amazon receives a lot of justified criticism, but I lived before you could buy something on the internet using your phone and expect prompt delivery. Story 16. The boredom. Yes, I am a digital addict, but I am rarely bored now that I potentially have the sum of human learning at my fingertips. And cats. So many cats. Story 17. No access to music without a compact disc or cassette player. If I heard a great song on the radio or somewhere else, I would have to buy the entire album to get it. I would enjoy the one song but end up with 10 more I did not care for. Story 18. I know this isn't before the internet, but before Google Maps, I hated MapQuest and being the co-pilot for my parents. Turn in something miles. I don't know when that is. I don't know where we are. Stop yelling at me because we missed the turn. Story 19. Recording music from the radio and hoping the disc jockey did not talk over the introduction or cut off the end of the song. Story 20. Today, I like the ability to look up somewhat obscure things quickly and easily, such as, why were there 2 cartoon shows called Ghostbusters in the 1980s, one of which is a spin-off of the 1984 movie and the other is something else? Story 21. Do not spend thousands of dollars on movies, animation, or adult content. Now you can watch it online for free. Story 22. Not knowing things can be challenging. A question about something would come to my mind. If I could not find the answer in an encyclopedia, I would be left wondering. Story 23. You know how kids used to get adult magazines? They had to find the kid at school whose dad had a subscription to Penthouse and pay him $1 a page for a photocopy. And God help you if the toner was low because there were no refunds on the prints. You wanted to watch a video? You had to squint at scrambled adult content in your grandparents' basement because your house didn't have cable. Or watch Titanic awkwardly with your family and then excuse yourself to use the bathroom. You know what Baywatch was? Softcore adult content disguised as a TV show. You know how I found my Rule 34 content? I had to trace over pictures of Tifa from my Final Fantasy VII issue of GamePro and draw the details myself. We had no shame. We did what had to be done. Story 24. How hard can it be to find information on any given topic at any given time? It is nice to be able to learn just about anything you want to know without having to leave your house. Story 25. People have no idea how much time used to be spent on directions and getting lost, actually lost, without knowing where to go. Story 26. Talking to loved ones over a great distance used to be both very expensive and unreliable. I live overseas, and now I can talk to my family very easily. Story 27. Having to program the video cassette recorder to record movies to watch later. The programming was always wrong, and the tape never lasted long enough to record the entire movie. For years, I had about a dozen movies on tape that all missed the last 15 to 30 minutes. Until the internet came along, I just had to live with not knowing how they ended or get lucky to catch them on television again. Star Wars and Jurassic Park are two that come to mind. Also, having to choose which tapes to record over when you wanted to record a new movie. Story 28. Having to get to a place using the directions they give you, and not with a global positioning system. I have a terrible sense of direction, and it is difficult for me to learn the names of the streets. Story 29. To settle a debate among friends, there were trips to the library, where each person could find conflicting evidence depending on the library, what they stocked, and how out of date their books and periodicals were. It is much the same now, except for the bus ride and the hours spent searching catalogs. It is much quicker now for the same result. Story 30. Having to go to the library to pick up encyclopedias and books to do research on a one-page essay about a topic in school. Don't get me wrong, I love the library for books, but for just researching information, having it at your fingertips is so much easier. Story 31. Parents driving the family around the neighborhood, calling your siblings names if they did not come home on time when the streetlights came on. Oh, they were in for a whipping too. Story 32. Those handwritten directions that you would get from one of your uncles. In 3 miles, take a left at the corner where there is a tree that has a tire swing. Story 33. When you tried to get on the phone and the internet was being used, the dial-up noise was very loud and almost hurt your ears. Additionally, you could not use the phone at the same time. Story 34. Having to go to places such as the library or talk to knowledgeable people in order to find out information. Story 35. A to Z road atlases and driving using a street map were always interesting and required patience. Story 36. Having to send out my demonstration reel on a VHS tape. Navigating with map books. Waiting 10 days for a transatlantic letter to arrive. Story 37. The difficulty of doing research for schoolwork. I needed to take the bus, spend hours in a library, or take just 2 books home and do the work. Story 38. The need to completely trust yourself and strangers if you need to ask for directions can be a lot to keep straight. Story 39. You used to have to go to stores or venues for concert tickets, wait in line overnight sometimes, and they still sold out immediately. Story 40. In pre-card times, all expenses were paid by the cashier. On weekends and weekdays after 4 p.m., it was not possible to access your money under any circumstances. Story 41. Standing in a long line somewhere, even before I had my phone, it enraged me. The phone is like a cigarette to calm my nerves. Story 42. My ever-growing pile of obsolete technology books that no one would take eventually had to be thrown away, and that felt awful. Story 43. Trying to study in the university library, but people are faking emergencies to get the staff to page their friends over the public address system. Story 44. 411. What is that information? Then all of the collect call services that emerged in the late 1980s flooded the limited market. Story 45. The lack of available qualified knowledge was evident. Libraries existed, but you had to access one and hope they had something reasonably up to date. You couldn't simply look up a random fact instantly. You also had to trust your father when he made up some incorrect information that you eventually found out was wrong decades later. Of course, the accessibility of information also leads to widespread misinformation. The problem has shifted from teaching children how to find qualified information to teaching them how to distinguish reliable information from misinformation online. Story 46. Dead tree books. Unpopular opinion, but I used to have a hallway in my basement lined with bookcases, plus a couple more around the house that I was able to get rid of. I gave all the books to local used bookstores until they started refusing them. This was about 15 years ago. I had one bookcase just for technical and school books, and one bookcase just for reference and trivia books. I had an extensive collection of fiction from the past 40 years, especially science fiction and fantasy, as well as bestsellers, including a lot of entertaining tripe and nonfiction. I replaced most of these with electronic and audiobooks, except the reference, school, and trivia books since all this information is available in a few seconds on my phone. In the past 15 years, I have greatly increased my library of electronic and audiobooks, too. Besides the room these took up, moving is much easier. Almost forgot, I also had a couple of bookcases of media, including albums, digital versatile discs, compact discs, cassettes, even video home system tapes. I was also able to get rid of these. Story 47. I do not miss having to wait to look something up at the library when I wanted to know more about it. Disclaimer: libraries are great, and I borrow extensively from my local branch. Story 48. Hearing about a news story and having to wait hours for the news to come on television to get more information, or having to wait until the newspaper arrived the next day. Story 49. Driving an hour to the closest bookstore, only to be told they do not have what I want but can order it. I was asked to come back in 2 weeks. Story 50. Not knowing what you do not know. No access to mental health or health resources other than going to your doctor. I grew up with anxiety and did not speak to my doctor much. You really thought you were the only one with whatever problem. Story 51. Organizing to meet someone, setting a time and place, and they do not cancel 5 minutes before. You had that trust with your friend that they would show up. Story 52. Having people confidently stating something that is completely incorrect with no way to prove they are wrong unless you carry a pocket dictionary or will a chest with the latest encyclopedia collection. Story 53. How hard it was to connect to accurate information. A lot of common knowledge was just rumors and assumptions that sounded good. If you did not put in the effort to write down your and your friends' or family's questions and then look up the information at the library, you basically had to rely on feelings. Story 54. Just not knowing things. I love having the answer to every question at my fingertips. I was the type of child who was always asking questions, from actual knowledge seeking to just trivial facts. Now all that knowledge is mine. Story 55. Having to spend hours searching various places and sections for information and research on any given topic is difficult. Now I can look at my phone and search for things for my own benefit and convenience. Story 56. Not knowing anything and just having to live with it, like arguing for hours about a movie fact with no way to check. Story 57. The absolute unfair equity in knowledge. Only people who studied knew whom to talk to and knew where to find information. If you know how to search and review, essentially everything is now at your fingertips. I do not miss those days at all. I like being smarter and informed. Story 58. Serial killers. We had some real weirdos back then. They blended in like normal people and years later would finally get caught, which was shocking. Story 59. Going to multiple libraries and using every available method to find one small fact that is buried in the vast amount of human knowledge. Story 60. I don't miss not being able to search the internet for anything that pops into my head at any moment. For instance, watching a movie on television and trying to figure out who that actor is and what they are doing today. Story 61. Not knowing the lyrics to your favorite songs and still singing either phonetic nonsense or incorrect lyrics to this day. Story 62. I managed a furniture store with 24 employees in the 1990s. The only computers we had were our point-of-sale terminals, AS/400 terminals, and terminals that could request and print credit reports. We had 3 massive walls of filing cabinets, and my cashiers had filing to be done constantly. We were never caught up. Once every winter, we pulled every folder, checked the contents, and reorganized the drawers. We were part of a chain. To communicate with the home office, We had a printer connected to a very small aperture terminal that connected to a satellite twice a day and printed a large pile of reports on wide green bar paper. If the power was out or the printer was turned off during transmission, we did not receive those reports. Every week, I called every manager of every store in our division and collected their sales and collection numbers. They were running their own stores and were busy, so if they were unavailable, I waited for them to call me back. Took hours. Once the numbers were collected, I called my division manager and relayed the data to him. If someone gave me a wrong number, or he wrote something down incorrectly, the books were off. I made credit decisions on about a dozen sales a day. This required a salesman to physically write everything that a customer wanted on a worksheet. Then the customer would come sit with me, and I would fill out their credit application with pen and paper. Next, I would give that paper to a terms writer who would submit a request for a credit report, which eventually printed out. Then I would read the credit report. FICO scores had not been invented yet, so this took time and skill. I did some math on the customer's household budget and made a decision. Then I communicated that decision to the customer, and if they agreed to the terms, I printed a physical contract, reviewed it with them, and they signed it. Most of the time, the customer sat in an office waiting. Could take an hour. The sheer amount of time spent communicating, collecting, and storing data was immense, and sometimes I forget that. Story 63. Using my brain to remember phone numbers was amazing. I could remember many of them. Nowadays, I cannot even remember my own number. Story 64. Dating involves mustering the courage to talk to someone in person, risking rejection, or often backing out. You call and their parents or siblings answer, so you have to talk to them or leave a message which may or may not be delivered. You will never know. You wait by the phone. Then MySpace came along and helped me connect with women beyond my usual reach. Story 65. Calling the number to pay $1.25 to get a phone number for the business you needed to contact. Story 66. I grew up on the internet, but I cannot fathom not being able to find an answer to my curiosity or teach myself a skill like doing ollies on a skateboard. The internet makes it easy to learn new things. Story 67. Had a rotary telephone. I had to dial 10 or 11 numbers to call someone, and if I made a mistake on the last number, it was very frustrating. Story 68. Oh, there's so much. Every once in a while, I'll hear an old song on the radio that I haven't heard in years, and I'll realize I never really did know all the words. Now, I can just search online for that, which is amazing, or being on vacation and sending photos a few seconds after taking them to a friend. When my oldest child was born in 1997, we took our camera film to the 1-hour processing place. Then my husband was able to send a copy to his parents in Australia by fax, and we thought it was amazing that they could see her picture within a day of her birth, rather than having to wait a couple of weeks for postal mail. Now, in retrospect, even that 24-hour turnaround is outdated, and the resolution of images is much better. Story 69. I do not miss being unable to look at reviews for a product or service before I buy it, or having very limited resources to find a review before the internet. Story 70. The only thing that comes to mind is actually getting genuinely lost and needing to ask for directions. I love the map applications. As for anything else, it is hard not to miss those times regarding the internet. Life is really just about expectations, and before the internet and phones, we did not expect any of those convenient things. Therefore, not having any of it was not inconvenient. Electronics and gadgets made life better for us, not for the corporations interacting with us. There was no equivalent of a company requiring us to download an application to sign up for a rewards program so they could track us more easily. They had to be nice to us and earn our business by not requiring customers to do annoying work for them. If you had a paper ticket to an event like a concert, you could get into the concert. The venue did not need an information technology department to maintain the scanners, just some people to take tickets. It all worked just fine, at least as far as I could tell. If I had family far away, I might care a lot more about the communication aspects. Story 71, having to listen to just a 60 or, if you were lucky, 90-minute cassette tape in my Walkman. I used one as recently as 2006, so I still remember being at the hospital all day and having to flip the tape over to play the next side multiple times. It is much better having over 800 songs in your phone's library, with literally any song ever on YouTube waiting to be listened to. Story 72. Not having answers easily. If you wondered about something, you had to ask someone or try to find an answer in a book. People would sometimes make up false information, and you might have believed it because it was not easy to find out for yourself. Story 73. The Yellow Pages, especially when you lived in a smaller town like I did. We had books for larger towns that we had to travel to many times. Story 74. Remembering a movie you saw on television once, but it was just the latter half, and not being able to look up the title or what it is about or see the rest of it. Story 75. Using an encyclopedia that was already out of date a week after it was printed. Those 1990s technological innovations occurred literally every other month. Story 76. As an introverted high school student of the 1990s, without the internet, I would never have had the chance to have deep and thoughtful conversations with girls my age from other high schools in the area. I could never work up the courage to talk to them in person at school. One of the online chats turned into a date with a girl from a school 5 miles from mine, and we met at a sandwich shop. Not much came from that one, but it was a first date experience for me. Story 77. Having to look deeply into sources to find the one simple answer I am looking for. Just type in, "Are dogs allergic to specific ingredient?" and you will find hundreds of sources to check and verify. Story 78. You have a song and you are trying to remember how it goes, or you are trying to recall the title or artist. Story 79. Good Lord, the moments of having nothing to do. Now I can at least find some mindless entertainment to stare at. I remember as a kid just sitting on the floor dissociating while staring at the roof. Story 80. Looking up the spellings of words in the dictionary or having to handle such a large reference book regularly. Story 81. Getting directions to places was difficult. Using physical maps and hoping the signs were clear and in good condition. I remember arriving an hour late to a friend's birthday party because we couldn't find their house and got turned around. Story 82. As someone with large feet, I no longer miss having only 3 to 4 choices for shoes every time I went to the store. I now have many shoes. Story 83. Not being able to reach friends. My best friend had an older sister who used to be on the phone for hours. I could never call him, just get a busy signal. It was frustrating to go all the way to his house, only to find that he was not there. Story 84. The only way people could contact you was by calling you or dropping by. Now, with email, Discord, Signal, and everything else, there is no reason for you to call me or drop by unless we are very close. I also love having a living record of everything. When, for example, a company is trying to screw you over, it is tough to say something was not said when it is in an email. Story 85. Being yelled at by my mother as I rode in the passenger seat with a giant paper map in front of me. Fighting car sickness and trying not to cry as exits flew past us. I was trying to make out size 7 font letters through tears and sun glare. Story 86. Lack of freely available educational information. Coincidentally, my biggest annoyance now is being surrounded by people who do not use it. Story 87. I am hardly ever bored now. The trick is to find things you love or can educate yourself on without falling into the doom-scrolling trap. Story 88. Having to ask your parents to pay $10 for pay-per-view to watch a movie you really wanted to see, but it only started at specific times and you couldn't pause it after it started. Story 89. The way people could just lie confidently and you would believe it because it was so hard to fact-check anything. I thought it was illegal to have the light on in the car until I was 15. Today, I just search for anything I am not sure about. Story 90. Getting lost on road trips and the arguments that would follow. No need for maps or giving them out. Story 91. Paper for everything. My desks were always covered with stacks of paper, notes, notebooks, books, maps, guides, receipts, invoices, manuals. Then I had to organize and file all that. Of course, the one thing I didn't keep would contain some critical information I needed as soon as it was gone. Then stacks of files, boxes of files accumulating over the years. I discarded all that. It all fits on a single hard drive now, and I can search it. Ironically, I had chronic issues with paper organization, but my computer file systems are neatly kept. Story 92. I'm at least glad unreliable people don't make me wait in an ice cream parlor when my order is ready, only to never show up. I dislike unreliable people. At least they can now text, "Hey, sorry something came up. Maybe next time." Story 93. My dad made me pass a map test when I started driving. It was his personal test, and it involved figuring out how to get from point A to point B using a giant book of area maps. He made it extra hard by picking something on another page entirely. MapQuest was new at the time, but in his words, it was not reliable and could not be trusted. I am really good at reading maps now, but those giant map books as a travel essential are a thing of the past, and I am left with the now defunct non-essential skill. Thanks, Dad. Story 94. Going to a travel agency when you want to book a flight. They tell you a random price, then hesitate. Of course, only they see the screen. Then they tell you another random price. Eventually, you end up with a halfway affordable flight connection. One of those agents even asked me, "By bus?" when I said I wanted to go to London. Yeah, right. By bus. Do I look like Greta? Story 95. No one mentions this, and it is not because the internet replaced it, but planes and helicopters used to be extremely loud. I remember it was common for everyone to stop all conversation and wait until the plane flew past before talking again. If you had to talk over the plane, you would scream at the other person, hoping they could understand you. If it is things the internet replaced, maps, guides on how to do something, sending mail, having physical encyclopedias available, you had to block out time to watch a new episode on television. Story 96. Going to the movie rental place was fun, but I love being able to download a movie in minutes without leaving my sofa. It is the same for music or television. Story 97. Banking, budgeting, and payments. Banks are only open during working hours. Glass ceiling. Discovering professions was like secret societies before the internet. Story 98. 17 compact discs with only 2 good tracks, and all my favorite British bands releasing songs I could only get here on $12 import singles. That was disappointing. Story 99. Maps. I traveled to an event this weekend, and while routing to the hotel was easy, finding the restaurants everyone wanted to eat at would have been a nightmare. Postscript. Dallas has some of the worst roads I have been on. I have a new appreciation for the poor roads in my city. Story 100. Meeting someone next weekend in X. That person could be an hour late, have an accident, or change their mind at the last minute. If I am not home, I would never know. For me, the internet and mobile phones came more or less around the same time. Story 101. No global positioning system or Google Maps. I got lost all the time and it was frustrating. Now we can just input an address and go there. Thank goodness. Story 102. Fax machines are frustrating devices that frequently malfunction. Imagine combining the worst parts of an old-fashioned telephone system and a printer, then trying to make them small enough to fit on your office desk. Story 103. We used to have the radio, a black box, and cassettes for it. We also had the video player and a game compact disc, which contained many games like Adventure Island, Mario, Rainbow, Bomberman, Circus, and more. We took turns playing during our allotted time. Story 104. Keeping maps and telephone directories in my car. I am really bad with directions, and the global positioning system has been a godsend. Story 105. Growing up, my parents would have huge arguments in the car whenever we were trying to navigate somewhere new. They would fight over directions and maps, and it was always a completely miserable experience. But now, thanks to Google Maps, arguments like that have pretty much disappeared for everyone. Story 106. I would say using a Mapsco or a paper map to find your way around town, but with the ease of global positioning system, I now would be totally useless without it. I had much more of a general idea where I was before the internet. I do not miss having to use whatever random catalog I got in the mail to try and see if there were women with bikinis. Now it's just a click away. Story 107. Having to buy movies and video games instead of downloading them through a torrent was inconvenient. Life was difficult before the advent of chat generative pre-trained transformer because doing research used to take a long time. Story 108. Having friends randomly show up and expect me to hang out with them. I have always been antisocial. Story 109. Killing idle time was a major problem. It was difficult just sitting there staring into space. However, it was probably good for us. Story 110. Travel before the internet was much more work to figure out. Being able to research hotels, flights, tourist attractions, and other aspects of travel as we do now was a game changer. Before the internet, you had to rely on the American Automobile Association, books with sometimes out-of-date information, travel agents, magazines, and word of mouth. Although there is a lot of misinformation on the internet, it is much easier to figure these things out now. Also, who remembers having to use maps or written instructions to navigate? Global positioning system was also a huge game changer. Story 111. Not being able to easily check some cultural references, for example, the year a movie was released or the actor who played a character in a movie. Story 112. I was born in the 1990s. The thing I do not miss is this scenario. How do I do explain XYZ? Or what is explain XYZ? In the 1990s and early 2000s, you had to get a book, ask someone, or just figure it out. How do I do explain XYZ? Or what is explain XYZ? Now we have YouTube, Google, and Wikipedia. For fixing things or solving problems, we now have media and Reddit to ask for help. Story 113. The general lack of access to current, accurate information was a significant challenge. You had to go to a library or use outdated dictionaries to find information about various topics if you did not want to believe whatever someone told you. Additionally, you had to pay professionals to perform tasks that you can now do yourself by watching a simple video online. Story 114. Having to call a movie theater and listen to a repeated recording of what was playing and at what time. Story 115. Not being able to plan anything with friends was difficult. You had to show up at their house and awkwardly ask their mom if they were home and willing to hang out at the moment. I am so happy that nowadays, when I want to do something with friends, we can just send a few messages back and forth and schedule exactly when and where it will happen. Story 116. Only one thing comes to mind: having to use actual physical sources to write school papers. Story 117. Having to flip through an encyclopedia to explore a topic. And even then you only get small pieces of the information you want to learn. Story 118. Definitely do not try to get around without my global positioning system or even the MapQuest directions. I remember before MapQuest existed, trying to find someone's new home with handwritten notes on a crumpled piece of paper. The stress, the anxiety. Story 119. Not being able to watch what I want when I want is frustrating. However, it was a way to discover new content you might not watch otherwise. There are pros and cons. In the past, if you tried a show, you either watched it or did nothing else. Now, if a show or movie is not good, you can stop and watch something else. There are millions of video sharing channels, live streams, and video games available. The time of settling for poor content has been over for a long time. Unfortunately, the industries have not realized that yet. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.